What's up, everyone? Welcome to a trade deadline edition of Mets Off Day Live. I'm your host, Chelsea Sherrod, and today I'm so happy to be joined by SNY MLB insider Andy Martino and former Mets acting GM and founder of Four Ring Sports Solutions, Zack Scott. We are about an hour from the close of the MLB trade deadline, and the Mets have already made a big splash. I know a lot of us have heard the phrase all in over the past few days and the different acquisitions that they brought in. But Andy, I'll start with you. Before we begin, is there any Mets move that's currently percolating or should we be watching out for as we head for the 6 p.m. deadline? What are you hearing?
I think you're wise to start with me, Chelsea, because Zach's giving all the head shakes and squints that tell me that he's not totally on board with us yet. So I will, and that's good to see. Right? He was, hey, he's here. Hi, I heard him. Hi, Zach. No, the Mets are pretty much done. So you can relax, all you Met fans out there, and watch our show and enjoy our analysis, which is sure to be right on point about the things they have done. And we are not anticipating another big move from them, is what I am told. Now, if somebody calls David Stearns in 5 minutes and says, you ever thought about X, then I guess, sure. But my understanding is that they're likely done. I'd actually be interested. I don't mean to take your job, Chelsea, but hey, Zach,
No, please take it.
If a team thinks they're done at 5, like if you haven't done any legwork on anything, are you pretty much done? Or can like AJ Preller call you and be like, Lindor for Cease? Like, does that happen at 5 o'clock?
It used to be the case where you could do things really late. When I first started, I mean, we pulled off some big trades, like literally with a minute left or less than a minute to go. But they've changed things at MLB on the administrative side several years ago that makes it really hard to check all the boxes on what you want to do and need to do before you can complete a trade. So there are some trades that have happened where you don't have time to do a medical review because it's happening so late. So you kind of have to trust the other person that, both parties have to trust each other. But for the most part, if you haven't started down a path and with an hour left to go, you're probably done.
Well, then in that case, folks, the Mets are probably done.
Okay, there you have it from Andy Martino.
Except
I'm glad that we got a smile.
There's one tiny little thing they might do, but it's nothing that will get you excited. But they're done in terms of adding to the major league team.
Okay. Thank you, Andy. I'm glad we finally got a smile out of Zach. I think the frowns and the squints that was part of his war room face. So Zach, take us through what the war room is like during these trade deadlines. Who's in communication with other teams? And are you following insider information or do you try to just not get distracted by that?
The way it works you're in a conference room for the most part. It depends on the style of the general manager who's running the deadline room. It could be, a large group of people. When I was with the Mets, I kept the group very large. I wanted to, I was trying to learn about people there. It was my first year there. But I also believe that good ideas can come from anywhere, which was something I learned working for Theo Epstein, who always kept a pretty large open room for that reason. And he would ask everybody questions, even down to the intern. So, but it all depends. You may have people trying to work on specific tasks. It may be a lot of staring at each other, but I will say there's one thing that's definitely true is people are, refreshing X, seeing what, Andy and Jeff Passan and Ken Rosenthal's of the world are putting out there. And also on, MLB trade rumors, whatever. People are sitting there hitting refresh on that, just like fans.
Yeah, I mean, I think I check Andy's X account more the weeks leading up to the trade deadline than I do at any other point in the year. Andy, I love you, obviously, but this is where we get our information from.
Chelsea, that started as a compliment and became kind of backhanded at the end of the season.
I promise it was a compliment. I promise.
All right.
Well, guys,
pretty interesting the rest of the year, but I got you.
Very interesting in mid-January. I got to see what Andy's talking about then. Let's start off, though, guys, with the most recent transaction. So the Mets received Orioles center fielder Cedric Mullins for pitching prospects Raymond Gomez, Anthony Nunez, and Chandler Marsh. So obviously, center field was a point of emphasis for the Mets. Andy, early reports seemed like the Mets were interested in Luis Robert Jr., but talks died down and they landed with Mullins. The Mets were clearly in need of outfield help this trade deadline. But can you take us through how the Mets ended up with Mullins?
Yeah, so Mullins is a guy that's been on the radar all along. There are not that many center fielders available. Mullins, Harrison Bader, who went to the Phillies today, and as I said, Chelsea Luis Robert Jr. They were engaged on Robert, and they liked him, but they couldn't agree on value there. They had talks about Mark Vientos, Brett Baty, and Luis Angel Acuna. They were most interested in sending Vientos there, but it just didn't. It didn't really go anywhere as of yesterday, and it started to cool off. In fact, the Mets got the sense by the end of yesterday that the White Sox weren't going to trade Robert, and I don't believe they have. We're here talking, and stuff's happening. But I think there's a sense among a number of teams, like they're not trading Robert, and we don't know why. So that's what's going on with that. So the Mets went to another player that they'd been looking at, Mullins, who cost less than Robert was going to, and were able to get a true center fielder, which I think was important. I'd be interested if Zach agrees or disagrees, but you can go into the postseason with Jeff McNeil playing out of position in center, and he's such an unbelievable athlete that he's been making it work. But a true center fielder is something you want, and that was an area that I thought it wasn't like required for Stearns to shore that up, but I thought it was fairly important.
Yeah. Zach, do you agree? And do you like the Mets package for Mullins? And do you get the move to get him rather than overextend and get Roberts?
Yeah, I agree with what Andy said. I mean, I think the trade's a fair trade. They're moving prospects that aren't necessarily going to burn them. Mullins, he's a very flawed player, but so is Robert. I think in a vacuum, I'd prefer Robert, but it sounds like it's not in a vacuum. The price is different, right? So, and I think Mullins fits being a left-handed bat. They have a right-hand hitting outfielder. The bottom line is you want to have options. You only have one trade deadline for these next couple months plus October. There's no more August waivers. You have very little flexibility after today. So if you can create options, that's why I also like them not moving Vientos for Robert, is that it's hard to predict who's going to be the best fit among those guys that they have at third base, DH type of position. So I think he adds to it. He's a good, matches up well in terms of having lefty righty. They can, Carlos Mendoza can play the matchups if he wants to, but obviously Mullins, they gave up value to get him, that he's going to get the first crack at being that everyday guy if he can be. I think his defense has fallen off a little bit as he's gotten a little older, but I do like the move for them.
Okay. Andy, you reported that the Mets were discussing trading Mark Vientos. Were the Mets getting serious calls about Vientos, and why did they decide to keep him?
Well, they definitely were in discussions with multiple clubs about Vientos. They felt like I think I was the first one. I'm not trying to take a victory lap on something like this. I'm making a point here. The first one to write that they were open to trading Vientos, and then Vientos hit the grand slam that night in San Diego. So it's not like the Mets thought that was my grand slam, but I think I had something to do with it because they think that he's a good player when he's motivated, and he thinks that they think he's a good player anyway, but there's something about when he plays with a chip on his shoulder that seems to work for him. So it sort of worked either way, like talking about him, which they were, versus keeping him for now and letting him feel a little bit like he has to prove himself. That different things motivate different people. He doesn't need motivation. He's a really high makeup player, a good guy. They like him, but sometimes people just that had that extra edge can help them. I'm not saying that's why they didn't trade him, but they didn't trade him because he still brings something to the table. He's been hotter lately. He's been contributing more lately. Robert didn't turn out to be available potentially, so that's a big reason probably why Vientos trades didn't end up going anywhere. And I'm certainly I understand that they will revisit the idea of trading him this offseason.
Okay. I do like the victory lap though, Andy. I think that was warranted.
I have one Major League Grand Slam now. That was mine.
Valid. I love that for you. Let's switch gears to the bullpen. The Mets bolstered their bullpen, starting with Gregory Soto, then adding Tyler Rogers and Ryan Helsley on Wednesday night. Some are considering this now a championship caliber bullpen. Zach, I'll start with you. We knew the Mets planned on adding arms to the pen, but are you surprised that David Stearns went all in like he did to strengthen it?
I wouldn't say I'm surprised. I think it was an unknown. I didn't have an expectation. I mean, I think David going from a smaller market team to the Mets, like, was he going to change his approach? I mean, he did some things a little outside of the box in Milwaukee, obviously trading Hader at a time where they were, competing was a little unusual. I don't think that's a move you necessarily do in a place like New York. And obviously, he's got a different owner with a different mindset too. So I think there was just more of an unknown. I think anytime you have a chance to win, I mean, they're in a position where it's not so much about making the playoffs, it's about what you're going to do when you get there. And so they should feel confident that they're going to get there and build the team, one, to ensure that, obviously, but even more importantly, do damage once you get there. And so I think building a pen like this, the only concern I might have is, you get a lot of kind of short relievers here. The way they use their starters is there a problem, but the talent on paper is outstanding. And they gave up, between those deals and Mullins, I mean, that's 11 prospects, I believe they gave up.
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot, but I don't think they moved anyone that's really going to burn them, although I thought that once too, and it didn't turn out that way. So you never know.
What do you mean?
Who am I talking about? I don't know.
Oh, by the way, I can tell you the thing that the Mets might do now still. They're trying to trade. They're continuing to have discussions about Paul Blackburn. So that's a player that could be on the move somewhere else within the next 48 minutes. But that's not something that would probably add to their major league team, I wouldn't think. Zach, that doesn't get you a major league piece, does it?
I wouldn't think so. It might be just like moving some money around.
Right.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, Andy, like what would they expect in return for him?
Probably what Zach said. Cash considerations, low-level prospect, that kind of thing. A team that's trying to backfill a rotation spot that maybe just traded a pitcher, something like that. It's kind of the way the Mets got him last year was rotation depth. I don't remember what they gave up, but it wasn't a lot.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay. As you mentioned before, the Mets traded Giants setup man Tyler Rogers, giving up Jose Vuitto and prospects Blade Tidwell and Drew Gilbert. Andy, what made the Mets decide to give the Giants such a big haul for a 34-year-old on an expiring contract?
Yeah, that's what the industry was wondering in the moments after this deal. Like, what? In fact, I texted a Mets person like, "You're just getting Rogers?" And it's like, yeah, okay. But in all fairness, I think that David Stearns through his career has earned the benefit of the doubt. Where my second thought was, all right, he's like not a moron. He knows there's thought process here. There's rationale. What is it? Let me try to figure out what it is. And there was solid rationale. And I think once you thought about it and heard it, you're like, all right, I can see that. So to run you through it, Chelsea, basically, Budo was a guy who had become sort of a marginal relief pitcher and probably wasn't going to be on the roster for that much longer. Tidwell is, if they were going to call up a starting pitcher from the minor leagues at this point, he's like fourth on the depth chart maybe, and projects potentially as a reliever. Gilbert is maybe the third outfield prospect on the depth chart for outfield. Carson Benj and Jet Williams were ahead of him. Maybe Gilbert's a fourth outfielder going forward. I don't want to lay that tag on a person who hasn't even played in the major leagues yet. Maybe he exceeds that. Maybe Tidwell exceeds what I'm saying about him. So there's some risk, of course, in giving up these players. But it was a move of the Mets look at their situation, their major league roster, and say, we're in a window to win the World Series with Lindor, Nimmo, and Soto and Alonso right now, like right this year and maybe next year. So just go for it. And I actually thought it was kind of nice. You hear a lot from GMs these days of like, well, you know what? Rogers improves our chances to make the playoffs by 3.1%. So I'm not going to give up 11 years of control or whatever it was, probably more. And in this case, Stearns is like, you know what? Screw it. Let's go to the World Series. So I don't know, Zach, how did I summarize that? Do you take issue with any of those points of rationale?
No, I think it makes sense. I do think it was a little heavy price, but again, like I'm probably not too high on those prospects. I do like Budo. I think he's more useful than maybe they're giving him credit for. So I thought it was a little heavy, but not crazy. I like the player that are getting back. And I think one consideration is when you're trying to add four pieces, right? Like they wanted to add three relievers, and you kind of have to do these in order or get them done in time, sometimes you need to pull the trigger on a deal a little sooner than you want to. So like you could try to grind them down and get them off of one of those players into a lower level prospect or something different. But at some point, it's a bandwidth issue that you're trying to go also acquire a player from the Cardinals and a player from the Orioles, and so that has something to do with it too. It's just like actually closing these deals.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Jose Butto actually just put out a really nice statement, just thanking the Mets organization, his teammates, the fans, and everything on Instagram. If you haven't seen it, you should go check that out. But really heartfelt statement for his 9 years with the Mets. Finally, the Mets traded for Cardinals pitcher Ryan Helsley for prospects Jesus Baez, Nate Dome, and Frank Elizondo. So, Andy, can you break down this deal and why the Mets decided to part with Baez? SNY's Joe DeMayo's Mets' sixth best prospect in his preseason rankings. Why do you think the Mets decided to part with him?
I know you're asking the guy that wrote yesterday that the Mets traded Frank Elizondo, so I don't know what the hell these people are, and I shouldn't. And that's the point. Look, I understand that Baez and Dome are two guys that their player development people like, and they actually felt like this was a heavy price to pay too. But it's the same exact explanation, Chelsea. Let's go to the World Series. Damn it, That's what David Stearns did. He pushed his poker, and there's not. He did it without trading. They have relative untouchables. Nolan McLean, Benj, Williams, Jonah Tong. And they didn't have to part with any of these guys. So they were happy to be able to – I mean, this hurt a little bit, actually. But they were happy to be able to get an impact reliever for prospects that weren't their top guys. And nobody – unlike the one – and I joke about saying I don't – know how to spell the guy's name. No offense to Mr. Frank Elizondo, but the point is they gave up a lot of name like recognition prospects in the San Francisco deal, and they didn't really have to do that in this deal.
Gotcha. Okay, and to that end, Zach, the Mets so far managed to make some big moves without parting ways with any of their top prospects, but Baez was still a valuable part of their farm system. So are you okay with the Mets trading him to make this super bullpen, so to speak, rather than adding a starting pitcher?
I am. I think, when I look at the Mets farm system, I don't think they have a lot of obvious impact at the top of it. Like some other teams may have some better high-end players. And I like some of those players that Andy just mentioned. I do. Mm-hmm. But they have better depth than they've had in the past. And so I like that they're dealing from that depth. I think that's what you ideally want to do. You could argue, someone could argue never trade for rentals because it's usually a long-term negative deal. But as Andy said, like you're trying to win. And sometimes, the controllable players, we saw some of those guys that have control that you're giving up top prospects like the Phillies did and the Padres. And so this is exactly where you want to be in your farm system, moving players. I learned from Dave Dombrowski, from Theo Epstein, you kind of figure out who are going to be the core players of your next great team when you're building something sustainable. And anyone that's not in that group is on the table. Obviously you don't want to give them away. You want to put them in the right deals at the right time that makes sense. But you're not going to build a full big league team off of your farm system. It's just not the way it is. And some of those guys, if you hold on to them, their value is going to go down. And that's, we don't talk about that because it's not as obvious as when you trade a prospect away and he goes on to be a great player for another team. But holding a player that has a lot of value and then his value craters and he doesn't have it, that's a bad decision too, right? So it may be safer publicly, but it's also, not great. Mm-hmm. So I think that's the approach. And, there's a chance that one of those 11 guys that they've moved in the last couple of days or last week is a problem and that becomes a really good player. They, if they win a World Series, no one will ever care about it. But it's hard to do that. So I do think it makes sense. I am concerned about the starter that you mentioned that I just don't know what to make of this rotation that is like a two-time mm-hmm. rotation. It's not like guys go deeper into the games in the postseason. So these relievers are going to be leaned on a lot and, they have really talented arms. So that's great. But we also, that's the unknown that any team has going in is like, how are they going to handle the way we manage is totally different in postseason games and the off days and all these different things. There's just a lot of different variables and unknowns. So, you want to go for it. because it's all, you don't get trophies for having the best farm system. You get trophies for winning championships. And so I like that that's their standpoint. That's their perspective, and they're being aggressive. But yeah, they're not a perfect team, but there are no perfect teams.
Yeah, I mean, that's what it seemed like, that the Mets were choosing to add that bullpen depth because of the uncertainties, especially as far as health is concerned, with their starters, with these guys who are coming back off of injury, and then how they're going to lengthen them out for the rest of the season and into the postseason. But just to reset here for all who are still with us, just a reminder, the Mets added relief pitchers Gregory Soto, Tyler Rogers, Ryan Helsley, and outfielders Cedric Mullins, Andy Martino, who did his victory lap earlier, mentioned.
I had a grand slam.
The Mets seem to be done, barring a potential minor trade for Paul Blackburn. So we are still going to be monitoring that over the next 35, 40-ish minutes. Let's go around the league, though, guys. Some notable moves from around the league. The Phillies made a big move by trading for right-handed pitcher Yohan Duran from the Twins for 2 top prospects and catcher Eduardo Tait and right-hand pitcher Mick Abel. The Padres traded shortstop Leo DeVries. That's MLB's number 3 overall prospect. Right-hand pitcher Braden Nett, the Padres' number 3. Right-hand pitcher Henry Baez, Eduardo Nunez to the A's for right-hand pitcher Mason Miller, and for lefty JP Sears. The Yankees received David Bednar, and they are sending the Pirates catcher Rafael Flores, catcher and first baseman Edglin Perez, and center fielder Brian Sanchez. So, Andy, I'll come to you first. How does the haul the Phillies, Padres, and Yankees gave up for top relievers compare to what the Mets had to give up for Rogers and for Helsley?
That's tough because, as Zach was saying, like, some of those guys might burn you down the line, but these are teams that are all in, that are competing with each other to be all in. So I almost think it doesn't matter. And I think I would use this opportunity on this point to even make it defense of the Mets 2021 trade deadline and the thing we were joking about before with Zach, because the difference between, and I mean it, and to answer your question about Chelsea, about these prospects that are moving back and forth, the difference between trading Yoenis Cespedes in 15 for Michael Fulmer, who won Rookie of the Year next year for Detroit, and trading Pete Crow Armstrong for Javi Baez in 21, is you're taking the same risk in the room. You're just you're trying to win, and it's easy in hindsight to say, like, oh, well, you shouldn't give up this guy, but it was okay to give up this guy. But I can imagine how difficult projection is for these young prospects, and all of these deals that you just mentioned, Chelsea, are teams that are trying to win. I can tell you, I know the Yankees and Mets system better than other teams, and I can tell you that the Yankees were dead set on not giving up any of their top guys, and they didn't, because they just weren't all in to that extent of giving up top prospects this year. Mets didn't give up any of their top guys. It's harder to speak to the other systems, but I just don't think it matters that much. This is the objective here is when it makes sense, not to be a crazy irrational organization, but to try to win when you have a chance.
Yeah. Zach, for you, do any of the trades that I just listed stand out to you as particularly good or particularly bad?
I really like what Dave Dombrowski did in Philly, because I think he got one of the best arms out there, and he's a controllable arm. I mean, I worked for Dave for 4 years. He wants dependable impact. Dependable impact is very expensive, whether you're paying for it in free agency or you're paying for it in trade. So I actually think that's a fair trade on paper. And it's a team that, I think their bullpen's just as good as the Mets. They're probably the two of the best bullpens in the game now. And I think that's a solid move by them. It's a lot. They paid a big price, and I like it for the Twins too, given where they're at.
Mm-hmm.
But this is what Dave does, and this is the reason he's going to be in the Hall of Fame. I do like what the Yankees did too with Bednar. That's a deal that I think made sense for both clubs as well. The Padres deal, I think, is an overpay. I don't love that for them. I do appreciate aggressiveness, especially, you could make the case that a team that's, battling for a playoff spot, which there aren't many in the National League, I think, and they're one of them, and they're in a good spot for it, that they should be the most aggressive. So I think, well, I always admire AJ Preller's kind of ability or willingness to be aggressive. He's given away a lot of really good young talent over the years, but they still are competitive. And that's the bottom line, to Andy's point, is it's not, they have yet to make deals that have put them in a spot where they can't compete for many
Mm-hmm.
years. And that's what you're trying to avoid.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to go for it, you just got to go for it. Another big move from around the league was the Mariners. They acquired third baseman Eugenio Suarez from the Diamondbacks for infielder Tyler Lockleo, right-handed pitcher Hunter Cranton, and righty Juan Burgos. Andy, does this trade tell you anything about the value of the pitching market this season? Because it doesn't seem like the Mariners gave up a ton for an all-star third baseman.
Again, yeah, it's hard to say other prospects for an organization that we don't look closely. You just got to trust that. First of all, again, you just appreciate that the Mariners are all in and trying to win more than, what was it, 53% of their games, or maybe that's how they feel like they're going to get there this year. But it's hard to evaluate a trade with prospects from another organization like that.
Yeah, that's a valid answer. Zach, as a GM, do you ever feel the pressure from fans to make a big splash, even if your gut is telling you that it might not be the best move?
I don't think so. I've never felt that pressure from fans and GMs that I worked for. I think it's not about the fans directly creating pressure for you. You know, you're not following necessarily what fans are saying because that's risky. But I think it's more at the ownership level, quite honestly. So they're more aware of that. They're more focused on the business as a whole, and obviously the fan experience and fans' feelings. This is for the fans. We don't have jobs in this game without the fans. We're not talking about it here without the fans. So they're incredibly important, but at the same time, like, you got to try to not be emotional, because fans can be emotional. So you don't want to be influenced, but it can influence an organization, and I've seen that, and it can be hard because once you feel like, you know, we got to be all in, we got to do whatever it takes, we got to make a big splash, we got to get people excited, I think then you might make moves for the wrong reasons.
Yeah, that's valid. I always kind of wondered if the fans, if that pressure, so to speak, actually played a role at all. So it was really great to get some insight from you on that. Let's go back to the Mets, though, guys. As of now, they've seemed to escape this trade deadline without giving up any of their top prospects, but also their young talent in the big leagues. Andy, you mentioned
Mm-hmm.
earlier the Mets may be interested in trading Vientos in the
Mm-hmm.
offseason. Does the club view him as the odd man out in the Baty, Mauricio, Vientos trio?
Yeah, at the moment, I would say if there is an odd man out, because David Stearns likes athleticism and defensive versatility, and he's the least defensively versatile of those players. I would argue that he's also, with the caveat that Mauricio might turn into this. Right now, Vientos is the one guy that can get hot enough to really carry a team. We saw it. He's hit 27 home runs in the major leagues and dominated in the playoffs already. Baty's ceiling is obviously not as high, but he's giving you more right now with versatility, and he's hitting better. And Mauricio has so much potential. Some concerns about swing decisions and chasing that we'll see how that shakes out over the next year or two. But right now, yeah, Vientos, even though I don't know that he'd be my odd man out, he is theirs at the moment. But there's time. You go ahead and dominate another postseason like you did last year. Maybe it becomes harder to trade the guy. And I will say, too, that another important element of this is the Mets do not have a first baseman under team control for next year currently. And one of the arguments for holding on to Vientos has always been, we might need a first base. We might need him to play first base next year. So that's a consideration, too, that they'll carry into the offseason.
Yeah, Mauricio has incredible upside, but just like you just mentioned, Andy, I wonder if how Vientos performs in the postseason will impact how the Mets kind of feel about him going into the offseason, and if they do choose to bring him back. Zach, how do you balance wanting to get your young guys, especially in the minor leagues, playing time when there's just not enough space in the lineup? How do you balance that?
Well, I think, you know, it depends on how you feel about those guys long term. Like, what the decisions that you make about how you're going to utilize them at the major league level versus getting them every day at bats, the minors. It depends on what you see them as. So if you see, you know, Acuna, for example, as a player who's really going to kind of bounce, you know, could bounce around, run off the bench, be some depth, can play in a pinch or when there's an injury, then maybe you're fine with him staying in the big leagues because he can provide that potentially now versus a player that you think has more upside to be an everyday guy. So let's say that was a Vientos in the past, but that you maybe wanted that guy to play more when, because there was times I remember the last couple of years where people wanted to see him playing the big leagues. And it's like, well, if he's not going to play every day, you might have a better chance of tapping into his upside if he, and if he plays every day in the minors. So, and then there's the other thing of it's really hard for anyone, veterans, it's hard for them to not play every day. It's hard to get in a rhythm, hard to have a routine. So that's hard for anyone when you already have young players trying to make the adjustment to the big leagues. I'm not sure it's ideal for them to be doing it only playing a few times a week. Although you could make the case, well, you could put them in the most favorable matchups to probably set them up to succeed. So if you have a right-handed hitter, maybe he's facing lefties, and so that gives him a better chance to succeed. But it's hard when you're trying to win and you're trying to integrate young players. I think that's one of the hardest things to do in baseball, and we've seen it. And the Mets over these last couple of years, they've had guys who, when I was there, they were top prospects, and now they're big league players, and some of them didn't pan out the way we expected, and they're running out of time because they're out of options. And you have like 3-4 guys like that you got to make decisions on. Are they going to even be on our roster next year? So I'm sure that drives part of their decision making, is that those guys are running out of flexibility.
Yeah. Also, I guess too, when you want these young guys to try to start building some consistency when they're not in the lineup as much as you might want them to be, or as much as they might want to be, that can be tough. So definitely a hard decision that I'm glad I don't make, or any of us make right now. Andy, I think it's time for another victory lap for you.
What I do this
some big personal news. You just announced that you're publishing a new book.
Hey, thanks for that, Chelsea.
Look.
I didn't know we were going to talk about that.
Of course. I love victory laps. Into the Cohen's revival of the Mets franchise. When Cohen first arrived on the scene, the Mets were big spenders with a win now approach, but now they seem more balanced with Stearns and valuing their arm system. Andy, how do you see Cohen's approach change or stay the same since he took over the team?
That's a great question, Chelsea. He has evolved over the years, and some of the stuff that was happening when Zach was there, frankly, is just some of the things that aren't happening anymore. Like more emotional tweets about what was going on with the team. I would say that Cohen has really gotten to a place where his president of baseball operations is got leeway to really run baseball operations. I'm not saying Cohen was ever a meddling owner or anything like that. Maybe that would be for Zach to say, or not to say. But I think he's learned over time, like with the rhythms and cadences of how an owner works with the front office. What he's always had and what hasn't changed at all is this burning ambition to win and be great and revive the Mets and lead this franchise back to the glory that it has in fact seen before. And part of this book project is to show that the Mets actually, the LOL Mets thing was kind of always unfair, because this is a franchise that had success almost immediately upon becoming an expansion franchise. 7 years later, they won a championship. They dominate the town in the 80s. There have been these spikes of success, but they haven't had sustained success. So the LOL Mets thing, they haven't been able to quite shake. So I would argue that with Cohen's resources and ambition, Stearns' intelligence, and Carlos Mendoza's human leadership, they're in a good place now to have that sustained success. I also thought Zach was very good, and I would have made the same case if you were still there, Zach. I really mean that. But right now, the leadership group they have in place is strong. So Cohen's just learned how to put that in, get the right people for him in place to move forward and hopefully not have so much turnover now. Since we lost Chelsea, Zach, I'm going to interview you now and tell you or ask you if you thought, so based on what I just said, you were inside then and you're on the outside now, but did you find it challenging at the time to help Steve learn those rhythms and cadences of how a front office and ownership would interact, or not be as public about certain things that he was putting on Twitter that he isn't now? Were those conversations that you had with him at that time?
Yes, I think, to your point of what you just said, he's very different from the outside looking in. It seems very different than what I experienced. And I understand when I was there, it was his first year owning the team. He had been obviously a minority partner there, but it's totally different being the controlling owner. And so, he's trying to figure out what kind of owner he wants to be. And we did have some conversations about that. And like you said, it was, should I be calling the team out when they're not doing well? Should, like George Steinbrenner style, or he cares a lot about the fan experience. So a lot of his intention on Twitter was to give them access to him, which is unique and I think in a lot of ways good, but obviously comes with some risks. I know he was experiencing kind of the roller coaster of the season from a different perspective and feeling a little bit more surprised by how emotional he was feeling about wins and losses. And so, that's all stuff that comes with when it's new. And I understood that, but Steve's a very smart guy. So he talked almost daily. He asked a lot of good questions. He started out, when I first got there, I was assistant GM. We'd have conversations then too. And he'd just say like, hey, I don't know anything about this stuff. I want to learn. So I really appreciated that with him. But yeah, I think he's figuring it out. He had a season where, we were going to stay under the luxury tax. It's very different than how they've kind of built the roster more recently. So a lot of things were very different in his first year. And I think the circumstances of, my situation, the reality of it is, with things not working out with Jared, and then I'm in an acting GM role, although I was essentially doing everything a typical GM does, it was still like an uncertainty. And Sandy is there with obviously his great resume as the president, but he's got to focus on business things, but have a voice in baseball. And Steve trying to figure, I think now with someone like David, who's obviously very seasoned in that role, very steady hand, I think that's exactly what they need, is just for Steve to be able to, and they probably did this with Billy as well, where it's like, just going to be as clean and clear as possible of kind of how things are going to work. And I think all three of us were trying to figure out how things were going to work because it wasn't crystal clear at the time, what was, what everyone's role and what everyone's voice meant in that process.
Yeah. Andy, we joked earlier about you taking my job. My Wi-Fi just conked out for a quick second, so thank you for steering the ship there. And once
it's
again,
not easy what you do,
on the new book
Chelsea.
too.
I've always said that with when we're on getting ready for baseball night in New York. Whoever's in the, I think we've had this conversation. I'm so comfortable in that panelist seat, but if someone said to me 30 seconds before air, you've got a host, I'd be sweating and heart would be pounding and I'd be messing up all the transitions. And so what you do is harder.
No, that was seamless. So thank you so much. Just moving along here, guys. One hole that the Mets did not fill yet is starting pitching. On paper, the Mets seem fine, but injuries have played a huge factor in their success lately. Zach, do you think the Mets have enough arms to carry them to the playoffs?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I do think it's their biggest question mark as far as, what's going to happen with certain guys. Obviously, there's been a lot of discussion about Clay Holmes in this unknown territory with his innings and changed role, and he's struggled a little bit in some recent starts. So, that's a concern. And obviously, they're still building up Manaea. I mean, that is going to be the biggest question mark for them going forward. I think they've answered a lot of the other questions that were there, and they're a really good team that has just as good a chance as really anyone, because I think all the teams that are going to be competing have flaws, whether that's due to injury or just roster construction. So, yeah, it's a concern and an unknown, but I still think I'm not worried about them making the playoffs. It'll be interesting to see, how things go the rest of these last 2-3 months.
Yeah, for sure. Andy, were the Mets pursuing starting pitching as the deadline neared and the price was too high, or did they have the confidence in the staff that they have?
I never got the sense, Chelsea, that they were super engaged in starting pitching. It was definitely going to be aggressive on bullpen, as obviously it turned out to be. Center field was like a want to rather than a have to, but they ended up, of course, doing that. And starting pitching, I think, was more what GMs like to call opportunistic. Like, you're out there, you're having conversations, you're seeing if something fits. And if there'd been somehow a match with a top of the rotation type guy that could have helped them win a playoff series or start in a wild card series or something of that nature, they would have been more than open to it. But it just was never the place where it seemed like they were putting the most energy. My understanding of the way Stearns thinks of this, and this is borne out by the way he ran the Brewers, is that there's a lot of different ways to put together a pitching staff. You're trying to cover innings in the most effective way that you can. And he felt like by bringing in this great bullpen, that was a way to do it. And I think it's also important to note that if they were going to bring in a starter, it was going to have to be somebody who they liked better than the first handful of starts of a Nolan McLean's career, or Jonah Tong, probably not this year, but Brandon Sprode is somebody. I think McLean's certainly first in line, but I think we're going to see a big league debut or two from those pitching prospects for the rest of the season. And that was part of their calculation too, is that they've got those guys. There's, of course, uncertainty in debuting a guy. Even if he's good, you don't know what you're going to get in his first 5 starts necessarily. But they do feel like that gives them some insurance too, where it's not that they had to go out and just get a mid-rotation guy just to get a starter.
Yeah. Zach, as a GM, how do you balance and wanting to give your young arms a chance in the future, but also needing pitching to win now?
Yeah, just like the position players, it's tough to break in any young player at any position. But I typically like to try to break in a young arm in the bullpen. That allows you more flexibility in terms of giving them a soft landing. You could start with lower leverage innings and then work their way up to see how they do, especially the first few outings where they may have the nerves and then they can kind of settle in and be who they are. So I do think pitching is actually easier to break in that way because you have the bullpen as a way to do it.
Okay. I have one last question for the both of you as we begin to wrap up here. I'll start with you, Zach, though. Did the Mets do enough this trade deadline to solidify themselves as World Series contenders?
Yes, I definitely think they did. Like I said before, are there still questions about some things there? Yeah. Are they a perfect team? No, they have some flaws. But, one thing I know fans can struggle to do when they're a fan of one team is to kind of zoom out and take a look at all the other teams that they're competing with. And there's some really good competition out there. But all the fan bases of those other teams probably feel the same way, that their team is not perfect and that their team is flawed. And so I think they're right there. They have as good a chance as anyone to win it all.
Yeah, I agree.
What do you think?
Yeah, they did not have a championship caliber bullpen 24 hours ago. They started with Gregory Soto was a nice add, the lefty, last week, but so I did not think that they had a legit shot at that point, but I knew they were going to improve. But just to take a snapshot of 24 hours ago, they didn't, and now they do. So that tells you everything you need to know. Look, their offense, could you lengthen the lineup a little, I guess, but really, if Pete Alonso, Juan Soto, Francisco Lindor, and Brandon Nimmo are cold, like they essentially all are right now, other than sort of Soto, then they're in trouble. And if those guys are firing, or at least most of them are in October, then you're a World Series contender. And that's nothing that the trade deadline can address. It's just that they have really good hitters, and they have to hope that those guys are on point when it matters the most. And if they are, then absolutely this team could win the World Series.
Yeah, and they're all in to do it. So we'll see what happens. But a very active trade deadline for the Mets. Very exciting, very active. That'll do it for us here on Mets Off Day Live. Be sure to check out more of Andy's reporting on Baseball Night in New York at 6 p.m. on SNY, and the Mets Pod live on YouTube tonight at 7. Thank you both so much, Zach and Andy, for joining us. Andy, everyone congratulate him again on his Grand Slam and on his
Thank you.
book.
Thank you.
Very
I appreciate
exciting
that.
For you. Always a pleasure to do this with the both of you, and we will see you on the next Mets Off Day.
Thanks, Chelsea.
Thank you.